I'm Jesse Lubinsky.
I'm Donnie Piercy.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Heil, hosts of the Partial Credit Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network.
Just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Elliott Seif, PhD. He is an educational presenter, author, school volunteer, and public school advocate. And today we're focused on his book, Teaching for Lifelong Learning, How to Prepare Students for a Changing World. Awesome book. Perfect timing for this. You're going to learn so much. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if, there's many different ways you could support the podcast. One of them is by going to my website, stephenmiletto.com, and joining the email list. What do you think about that? That'd be cool. Another way would be that you could go there to stephenmiletto.com/reviews and leave a review, say some nice words. That'd be nice. Another way would be on the front page of my website, and in the area called donations, you could go in and click on buy me a coffee. And when you go in there, maybe donate $1 or $2 to help the podcast meet its bills and deal with its needing to upgrade gear and to use the different programs that it does. That would be so cool. And then finally, another way would be, just simply to share it with a friend. You say to somebody, hey, you ought to listen to this episode or listen to this podcast. Could you do that for me? One of those things? What do you think? That'd be so awesome. You're cool. Enjoy the show.
So at the beginning of the book, I use an analogy which I like a lot, and I'm using it in some of my staff development workshops now too, and talk about the analogy to lifelong learning about how kids play video games. Believe it or not, I think there's some relevance there. And you think about the fact that kids get kind of addicted to video games. They get reinforced, they get lots of feedback, and they work through levels. They start at a simple level and they work to much more complex ways of doing video games. And I like to think that's what lifelong learning is about.
It's the education podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Elliott Seif, PhD, is an educational presenter, author, school volunteer, and public school advocate. He has served as a social studies teacher, a professor of education at Temple University, and a director of curriculum and instruction services for the Bucks County Intermediate Unit, an educational service agency for Bucks County, Pennsylvania. At the Bucks County Intermediate Unit, Dr. Seif provided leadership in curriculum and instruction training and reform, and he developed, led, or participated in more than 50 program reviews for Bucks County school districts. He has conducted professional development programs with numerous schools and school districts throughout the United States and abroad on a variety of topics, including standards-based education, thinking skill development, instructional improvement, assessment issues, and curriculum development. Dr. Seif is the author of many books, handbooks, articles, commentaries, and reports, including a textbook on the teaching of elementary social studies. He has published articles in Educational Leadership, the Journal of the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, or ASCD. Dr. Seif has received many awards for his accomplishments, including from ASCD, the Pennsylvania Association of Intermediate Units, the Pennsylvania Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, and Bucks County Schools. Dr. Seif earned a Master of Education degree from Harvard University and a doctorate in Curriculum Research and Development from Washington University in St. Louis. Our focus will be on his book, Teaching for Lifelong Learning, How to Prepare Students for a Changing World. Elliott, thanks so much for joining me on the show. Say hi to everyone.
Hi to everyone, and thank you, Stephen, for letting me join you today and share my information about my book and my life.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here, and it's really cool because as we were talking, I was wondering what the intermediate unit was, and you explained that to me. So we're like souls here because I'm the director of the RISA here in North Georgia, and you did curriculum instruction work for a similar soul there in Pennsylvania. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, Elliott, why'd you write Teaching for Lifelong Learning, How to Prepare Students for a Changing World?
So I started my career, as you said, as a social studies teacher, and I've had many experiences over the course of many years in the profession as a professor of education and curriculum developer and professional developer and author. And one of the things I got to do a lot of is to both teach and learn about teaching through the practical idea of doing it every day, but also observing lots of teachers, talking with administrators, working with curriculum specialists, professional developers, and so on. And as I did all of this work, I kept asking myself, what's the difference between good teaching and teachers that weren't as good? And how do you distinguish between them? And I began to think about the good teachers and what they did. They engaged their students. They had meaningful goals that helped students be successful. They talked about and thought about how to prepare their students for their future lives. Their curriculum was lively and interesting. The students were learning important ideas and skills. Their instruction was very well organized. Their assessments were interesting and clear. And as I learned about all of this over the course of many years, I thought about how can I help put all of that together into some kind of a framework that helps teachers, administrators, people in education see how we can better prepare kids for a lifetime of learning. And so the book came about as a result of all of those experiences and thinking about them and putting them down and thinking about all the practical aspects of what they were about. And that's what happened. I sat down one day, I wrote a proposal, which got accepted by Solution Tree, and then the book came about as a result of all that.
That's awesome and very timely in its in your information and such. This is um, if you're an educator and you're looking at whether you're going to be teaching in the classroom or whether you're going to be working with those who teach in the classroom. It's the topic is there needed.
Well, if I can add to it, the reason I think it's also timely is that we are living through a very difficult and challenging time for both us and for our kids who are going to live in an age of AI, science changes, things happening very rapidly, basically an uncertain and changing world. And we need to prepare them to live in that, which is even more imperative than it was in previous ages.
You got that right. This is, it's funny, just the mention of AI right now. At first there was a panic, then there was a kind of a lull in the panic as they're like, yeah, I think we could do it. And then all of a sudden the panic came back and we're kind of in between in some of those stages now. And that's just part of it, right?
Absolutely.
Good stuff. All right. So at the beginning of your introduction, and it's funny because when I was in college and as a young teacher and stuff, I used to have skipped the introductions of books, and I learned not to do that, and yours is one of them. So I'm glad as I started reading it, I'm like, yeah. In the beginning of your introduction, you share a John Dewey quotation, and it goes like this: "If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow." Why'd you use his thoughts and these particular ones?
So first of all, let me just say that each chapter has a quote at the beginning. And those of you who go and read the book, you might find all of those quotes interesting. But I picked that one because John Dewey, who I believe lived in the 1920s, 1930s, at the prime of his educational career, was a brilliant philosopher and an educator who strongly believed in educating and engaging students in meaningful learning. He started the Chicago Lab School, which became a laboratory for trying new things and new ideas in education. And unfortunately today, too many teachers, I think, ignore his good ideas. A lot of research shows that teachers still are, quote unquote, covering content instead of what we call uncovering content. Students are often passive in the classrooms. I have one quote in the book that from an educator who did some research on this, which says kids stand in the hallways, lively chattering, and they go into class and they sit there and they say nothing for 45 or 50 minutes. And teachers don't often teach the key ideas or the learning to learn skills that they'll need in the future, which John Dewey was committed to trying to get people to do. So lots of research supports the idea that we're not doing what John Dewey thought we should be doing in today's world. And that's why I use that quote, because we can go back to John Dewey, probably even before John Dewey, but we can go back to John Dewey and know that a lot of the ideas that we need to do today were part of his philosophy and his thoughts in yesteryear.
And I love that. This is, one of the things that I lament is that there's a lot of ahistoricism, if you will, where there's this missing, they miss the part where it's like, okay, I just want to tell you, some of this has been done before, and there's
Right.
and there's a lot of talk about it way in the past, and now we know more about the brain and can connect it all, and
Exactly.
it's like, so let's talk a little bit about John. So I loved it when I opened it up, and the first thing I see is a comment from John. So
Right.
awesome, kudos there. All right, so one of the things that you're going to talk about, it's right there in the title, is lifelong learning. So what's that mean to you? As you were creating this book, what is it that you have in your head is what lifelong learning is?
Right. So at the beginning of the book, I use an analogy which I like a lot, and I'm using it in some of my staff development workshops now too, and talk about the analogy to lifelong learning about how kids play video games. Believe it or not, I think there's some relevance there. And you think about the fact that kids get kind of addicted to video games. They get reinforced, they get lots of feedback, and they work through levels. They start at a simple level and they work to much more complex ways of doing video games. And I like to think that's what lifelong learning is about. We start at a certain level in school. We learn to read, we learn some basic thinking skills, we learn some basic information, and then we gradually work our way up to more complex ideas, more thoughtful ways of thinking about life and the world we live in, more about science, more about the social world we live in, and so on. Until when we graduate, we should be, if everything goes right, we should be at a point where we're still interested and curious in learning and growing, and we have a basic foundation that we've built which allows us to continue after school is over. So it's like video games. We continue to grow and grow and grow, and we can continue to grow more, and we need to be prepared for the growth that we need over time by going through these levels. And schooling should be like that. It shouldn't just end at 12th grade. It should continue beyond that. I have a quote that I like a lot, that students are in school for about 13 years, excluding college, but they need to be learning way beyond that. They will be in life for 60 or more years, most of them. And so we need to prepare them in those 13 years to grow in those 60 years or more.
I love it. And it's so awesome because it is, and it's so true, by the way. There's no, okay, I'm done learning, and instead it just gets more complicated, and there's more stuff you got to make yourself aware of as you progress in age.
And unfortunately, in a lot of situations, I don't think people mean to do this, but kids do stop learning. They graduate, and somehow they get turned off to being curious, to being curious about the world, to being interested, to read, to train for new things. Somehow that stops, and in today's world, that is a really unfortunate situation.
Oh, you're so right. It's just sad because it's like you just learn. There's so much out there to learn. You mentioned that word curious. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much to be curious about. And there's so many different ways of getting a chance to learn without having to take a formal class or something that, if nothing else, that you recognize that you can learn I keep learning about something. My favorite thing is I'm not really good at working with motors and engines and stuff like this, but I've fixed my lawnmower a couple of times thanks to people online. So
Right. Right. And today, all of that is available.
very much
You
so,
just
which
have
is
to want to do it.
right, exactly. Before we go any further, I want to take a minute to point out some formatting that you've included. And at the end of each chapter, you include a segment called Helpful Websites and Reproducibles. What are you hoping that the reader will do in these sections, and why'd you include them?
So the book is packed with lots of ideas and practical suggestions. There's a chapter on instruction, there's a chapter on goals, there's a chapter on assessment, there's a chapter on curriculum. All of that has lots of information. And first time through in the book, I think it's hard to absorb all of that. You get an understanding of the basic ideas, but um, you really have to sit with those ideas and be more thoughtful about them and dig deeper, as we're going to talk about later, dig deeper into those ideas. And so the websites and the reproducibles are designed to help the reader think further about what's in each chapter, to extend thinking, to tie it back, and also help them tie it back to their own schools and classrooms. How can these ideas be practically implemented and thought about in relation to your own classroom and school situations? There's also another thing, which I don't know if you saw. There's a free book guide that I've developed, which you can download in addition when you buy the book. And also that helps people to think more deeply, gives them also more suggestions and ideas of how to think more deeply about each chapter and to apply them to their own situations and circumstances. And then finally, I do have a website. I'll mention it now, www.lifelonglearninged.org, which has follow-up activities as well. It has blogs, it has resources. So there's lots of ways to continue the dialogue, to continue the conversation, to continue the thoughtfulness about the book and its chapters, both through the end of the end of each chapter, what's located there, plus all these other ways as well.
That's awesome. That's an incredible thing, because you're practicing what you're preaching there, as you're giving resources to be able to help people think a little bit more about what they're doing and create activities and such to get the kids doing. So I like that. So the readers, yes, you got stuff you got to follow up on and keep extending your understanding. So I love that. Love it. Yeah. Chapter 1 is and by the way, I'm not going to go through every chapter book. You got to buy your book. All right. You got to buy the book. All right. But there's a lot of information here, and we could be here for several hours if I did do that by chapter. But I am going to go by a couple of chapters. So here we are. Chapter 1 is titled Understanding Educator Goals That Support Students' Lifelong Learning. There are 4 key goals in this chapter. Can you share that in this section? Can you talk about those just a little bit?
Sure. So I'm thinking about those goals now a little differently. I think about them as what I call indicators of a lifelong learning education. So if you went into a school and you wanted to know, is this a school that is committed to lifelong learning education, is doing things to prepare kids for the future? How would you know that? How would you know that? And so these 4 goals are basically, I think of as 4 indicators that kids are being prepared. So number 1, is there in the school and in the classrooms what I call a growth-oriented learning environment? Are students being prepared with a growth mindset, with the idea of being curious? Are they being encouraged to be curious? Are they learning that effort makes a difference? Are they learning that mistakes are normal and that we learn from our mistakes? Are they being challenged? Do they see the learning as a challenge to continue on? All of those things are critical to creating a lifelong learning environment, lifelong learning education environment. So that's one of the things I look for when I go into a school. Is there welcome? Are kids welcome? Are they engaged in learning? Are they curious? Are they interested? Are they challenged? All of those things make a difference. And I would recommend, if anybody is more interested in this idea of growth and growth mindset, Carol Dweck, who is a key researcher in this field, has a number of YouTube TED Talks, which are worth looking at to see what, if you want to further pursue this idea. A second thing about a school like this is that when you go into classrooms and you watch what teachers are doing, they tend to emphasize not learning a lot of discrete facts, but they tend to emphasize understanding. They tend to learn about ideas and concepts and big ideas, and learn to understand the world a little bit better, but also they're learning a lot of lifelong learning skills. So they're learning how to do research. They're learning how to think. They're learning how to communicate well, to write well. They're learning how to collaborate. These and some others are the kinds of things I look for to see if teachers have these goals for kids. Are they preparing kids with these kinds of skills that they will need to continue their education in the future? The third thing I look for is, are there opportunities that the teachers are providing for kids to work independently, to apply and deepen their learning? So are they taking what they know about research skills and doing projects? Are they doing projects independently on their own? Are they writing essays after they've learned how to write essays? Are they doing a lot of writing in the classroom? Are they doing communicating? Are they doing presentations? Are they doing the kinds of things that show that they can work independently, so that, again, when they graduate, they are not only have learned these skills, but they've learned how to apply these skills in real life settings and situations. And then finally, this is one that I don't actually find we do enough with in schools. We don't even think about it enough. And that is, do we provide kids with a lot of broadening and enriching experiences that go beyond the school experience, that go outside the school experience? Do they go on field trips? Do people come in and talk to kids who are doing things in the outside world? Do we have a lot of extracurricular and enrichment activities? Do we have kids where they're learning a lot of things that are outside the school purview? What are they doing outside of school to broaden and enrich their learning? And with today's world, with video and so on, you can really bring a lot of that into the classroom as well. So those are four things that I look for that I think are really critical as indicators that a school is actually involved in preparing kids to be lifelong learners.
I love that. I think that's kind of missing sometimes, looking at how we get there. It can be rhetoric and said, and all
Right.
fill in the buzzword type thing, but I think it tends to be missing from what what somebody's really looking for. Are we doing this? So
You can walk around a school and really get a pretty good feel for that. If you're given the access to schools and classrooms, you can get a pretty good feel pretty quickly of whether a school is a lifelong education center or not.
so right, so right. The by the way, just a little bit ago you did this, and it's been mentioned a couple times. So let's talk a little bit about deeper learning. You talk about this throughout your book. So can you tell us why it's important, and could you maybe give us an example of what it looks like?
So one way to think about deeper learning is to contrast it with superficial learning. So when we're doing a lot of superficial learning, and that's not necessarily all negative. It's the idea that we're learning, like if you're learning about the American Revolution, you're learning a lot of facts and information, but you don't put it all together so much as just learning about Paul Revere's ride or the incidents that took place, the Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party, and so on. So we can learn about all that information, but digging deeper means we also start to think about, why did that happen? What caused it to happen? How does all this information fit together into some kind of cause and effect relationship? How did all of that affect our future? Are the idea that we wanted to be independent and a republic and no longer a monarchy. So how did that affect how we proceeded, how the Declaration of Independence was written, and so on? So digging deeper means the first learning often is that those facts and that information, but then digging deeper means we start to dig more deeply into relationships, into analysis, into interpretation, and so on. In my view of instruction, I think we often have to have both. It's not an either or here. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the literature seems to imply that you get into deeper learning without the superficial learning, but you have to know a lot to dig deeper. So I have a series of stages in instruction where what's the second stage of instruction is getting into information phase, a foundational phase of information, but then digging deeper means really learning more about it. I have in the book an example of a unit of study by a physics teacher where the end activity is to create an amusement park ride. And all of the information that the kids are learning in physics, which basically is not deep learning, gets applied to how you actually develop that ride, the physics of the ride, and so on. And that's a really good example of the difference between the surface learning and then the digging deeper learning in creating the ride. You're actually applying what you know, doing analyses, interpretations, and so on.
I love that.
That gives a good idea of the difference.
Yeah, I like that. That's awesome because there's it's funny when you look at the difference between if a child is asked to create something at certain ages, they're going to just create without any sort of rules, which is really cool. But then eventually they do learn that there are some rules, especially put out there by the law of physics or gravitational laws or something like this that make you have to abide by certain rules.
Right.
And you could really make that part of understanding of how that ride could function or not function or could work. And I like that. That's a great example. And I still think it's some of those rides. Yeah, I'm not sure it was ever meant for me. Okay, that's
right. I know the feeling.
One of the things in chapter 3 you talk about is assessing for lifelong learning. You share that there are 3 types of assessments: diagnostic, formative, and summative, that lead to improved performance. Could you share a little bit about this?
So first of all, we tend in education, teachers tend in education to focus on summative assessments. And the summative assessments are generally the multiple choice short answer tests, because those are easy to grade, relatively easy to grade. And if you think about those tests and that kind of a unit of study where you have a lot of learning that takes place, and then you give that final exam, and then you go on to the next unit, there isn't necessarily a lot of room for improvement on the part of kids. It's like either they pass or they fail, or they get a good grade or a decent grade, or they don't. And then you move on, right? So diagnostic and formative assessments are designed to supplement that, to make that learning more about improvement and synthesizing with what you already know than the focus on summative assessment. So in a diagnostic assessment, you learn about, do my kids already have knowledge base and a skill base. And I'm just teaching the same thing that they already know. Why am I doing that if that's the case? So if they already have that knowledge and skill base, I can move to a more advanced kind of learning than I would if I didn't. On the other hand, if they have never had writing, the writing process and don't know much about how to write, it doesn't pay for me to tell them to write something if they actually don't know the process. So I may have to go back and teach or reteach something that I thought they knew, but they didn't know. So diagnostic assessment is really important. I have a four-phase model of learning, of instruction. The first phase I call set the stage, where diagnostic testing is really a critical part. Diagnostic assessment is really a critical part. Formative assessment also is critical because what we want to do is learn how much kids have learned, and if they don't know what they are supposed to know, I have to go back and reteach it. Or if they can't perform a skill, I need to teach them again, and we need to improve their skill-based learning. So continually using formative assessment through self-assessments, through lots of different ways, is really critical. So I like to think the array of assessments, diagnostic, formative, and summative, using all of those is really critical. And the more you use the diagnostic and formative assessments, the better. There are a lot of teachers now and educators who are talking about grading for growth and assessment for growth. And that's really what this is about, using assessments to grow learning as opposed to just see whether kids know it or don't know it.
It's so
I
powerful.
hope that makes it clear.
Oh, it makes it very clear. I mean, it's so powerful because a lot of times, like you said, a lot of times it's for whether it's for quickness, speed, kind of bring things together and move on.
Right.
We can get stuck as educators in the world of summative, as opposed to taking time to find out whether they're even following you or not.
Exactly. And in the book, there's lots of different examples and options for different kinds of formative assessment. Quick things like check for understanding along the way, just to make sure that kids are getting what you think they're getting. These don't have to be complex assessments that take a lot of time. There are lots of ways to do it in simple ways, and also to use assessments that help kids self-reflect on their learning. So just asking kids, what did you learn today? I mean, basically, what did you learn today? Sum it up for me in a quick sentence or two, turn it in, and I get a pretty good idea of whether they're on track with me.
Yeah, I love that because that's something that it's too easy just to say, okay, that was a good class, good to see you here today. Clean up around your desk and see you tomorrow. And instead, maybe trying to figure out whether there's any misunderstandings or understanding of what you were just doing.
Right.
I love that.
Exactly.
We're getting close to finishing up, Elliott. And I one of the things I wanted to ask you is if you were the closing speaker for an audience of teachers, this coming summer, and you were talking to them about teaching for lifelong learning, what's something that you would want them to be thinking about as they left your talk? They get talking to each other about and so forth.
So I think teachers are pretty practical. They like things that they can do in the classroom. So all of these ideas are really important. Don't get me wrong. But my experience is they want something they can bring back to the classroom the next day if that's at all possible. So I probably would emphasize what I alluded to as I talked to you before. I would probably emphasize organizing instruction into these four phases that I talk about in the chapter 2 on instruction. So the four phases are, a first phase is called setting the stage, where you set the stage for learning, you build curiosity, you create a challenge for kids, you might use an essential question, and you diagnose where kids are at before you actually get to the learning that you want to use in the rest of the phases. And then the second phase is called building the foundation, where I practice a skill I want kids to learn. I teach an understanding or an idea, and I teach facts. I teach a basic information, ideas that are critical for this particular unit. And then the third is to extend learning and to apply and deepen learning and to create independent learning. So there I might have the kids choose a project to do that builds on what they've learned and do something independently. And then the fourth phase is what I call closure. And that means that the kids are able to complete their work. There is a summative assessment of some kind. And if they're doing projects and other kinds of learning, they do sharing there as well. So my hope would be, if I were working with teachers this summer and talking about the book, is I would try to show how my ideas can be applied through those four phases, so that if teachers organize their instruction in this meaningful way, they will be promoting this idea of lifelong learning.
Excellent. I love it. Love it. By the way, I have to ask you, so do you do talks like that?
I do. I don't do a lot of, I try not to do at this point in my career a lot of professional development, but I am doing some, yes.
Oh, excellent.
Through the publisher, on my own as well.
Excellent. All right, Elliott. So you told us a website before. It's time to give it to us again. If someone wanted to follow up and connect with you and or learn more, where would you send them?
First of all, I would send them to read the book.
Nice.
And then, yes, through my website, you can contact me through my website. There's also blogs on my website to follow up on a lot of these ideas and resources and other things as well. And that is www.lifelonglearninged.org.
Awesome. And I will have that information in the show notes so that they can find it and very easily and go to those sites. So good stuff. All right, I have two last questions I want to ask you, Elliott, and I like to ask these of my guests. And the first one goes like this. How do you overcome feeling like you may want to quit or give up?
Yeah, that's can be a difficult challenge. I think for me, I feel like even though sometimes I feel like I'm blowing in the wind, I think there's a really strong community of people out there that are doing some phenomenal work. Teachers, educators, authors, writers, people who do a lot of these things. And they're also committed to improving education. We're not all committed in the same way, but we all, I think, have the same goals in mind: to prepare kids for their future, and to make education a better experience for all kids. So that's one thing that keeps me going, this community of educators. A second thing that keeps me going is that I think small changes make a big difference. There's actually a book like that. I don't have it in front of me, but something like Small Changes, where an educator writes about the idea of how you can take a small change and make a really big difference. And so I see these small changes all the time. I see changes in the learning environment. I see changes in what people are thinking is important for kids to learn. So those small changes keep me going. They reinforce the idea that we can make a difference. I don't think we're going to get to the point where the huge changes are going to happen overnight, but small gradual change can really make a big difference. And as I see that happen, it cheers me on, and I'm happy to see that we're moving in the right direction.
Love it. That's awesome. Good stuff. Hey, last question for you. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Yeah, I had two teachers who strongly affected me. Both of them happened to be English teachers, by the way. I had one teacher in high school who, this one teacher was the only teacher who really taught me how to write. She would edit my work, show me what I needed to improve, but then leave me to do the improvements and reinforce the idea that what I did was successful. And so writing became more of an obsession for me when I was in high school. I was a fairly decent writer, but I became a much better writer because of her. So her work with me was really important. Then in college, I had a teacher who was not a full-time professor. He was a non-tenured teacher. He was there for a year, and he was a poet. His life really was about poetry. And he had us read books that I never would have thought of as college-level books. So, for example, he had us read Alice in Wonderland and talk about that. And I learned from him that there were all kinds of books that I would have dismissed as relevant, important, and useful, that reading was part of your life experience, and growing in many different ways was important. We had wonderful discussions in class. Grading wasn't really his thing. It wasn't important. He just loved to get people to read, to share his poetry, and so on. And so his love of learning gave me the love of learning. And that was really important for me.
That's awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
So I say thank you to both of them.
Excellent. I love that. That's so cool. And it's neat because of different time frames in your world too, as you're growing. I love that. Yeah, Elliott, thank you so much for sharing your book, Teaching for Lifelong Learning, How to Prepare Students for a Changing World. What an awesome book. The focus is amazing, as are all those resources that you provide. I love it. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you so much for this opportunity. It was a wonderful experience. I enjoyed talking with you. It really turned out to be more like a conversation than a presentation, and I loved it. Thank you. And your questions were wonderful. So thank you, and I wish you the best of luck too in doing these podcasts.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.